All right, welcome back everyone. This is Ask the Collective 12, or as we're going to say, Ask the Q-lective, because we have our man Q here today with us. My name is Rich Brubaker. I'm the founder of Collective Responsibility. It's great to have you back, and we're very fortunate to have our special guest Q. He was one of our first cohort of overseas interns going back, what, 2.5, almost 3 years ago, right?
2 years, yeah.
2 years, okay, so do us a favor, small introduction.
Okay, my name is Qusai. I went to UC Berkeley, did environmental science, and now I work for a solar nonprofit in downtown LA.
How did you actually end up here, like back in the day?
I was looking for internships abroad, and then I looked up the Berkeley Energy and Resource Collaborative, and then I saw this posting, and I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. I didn't expect a response. And
cool.
I got a response, and then I got a visa, and
that was it.
Yeah.
That was it, right? And he spent 3 months in the office, total character. You know, we spent 3 months together. You've been gone for 2 years. What is your question?
All right, so my question is, what has China done to develop out-of-the-box thinking senior management leaders in each industry?
So I guess, I mean, honestly, in this area, the out-of-the-box thinking has almost come from very practical, tangible problem solving. It has been the fact that, unlike in the West, where you need to solve the problem of somebody else that isn't in your backyard directly influencing you on a daily basis, if you're at the global level, when you're in China, I mean, you know, the air pollution's there, and we were talking about this over lunch, like the air pollution has gotten much better. And that's because, you know, people just, they see it as a challenge. The other thing I think has really changed, and I'll go back 15 years instead of 2, is that the level of security that the average Shanghai's in particular, but let's just say urban middle class, you have, what, 700 million urban residents now. I don't know what the current statistic is for middle class, but as that group has come to own assets, be it an apartment, a car, whatever, they have investment, they have savings, they feel confident that they're able to feed themselves. They're not fighting for every scrap anymore. They're out of that cycle. They now have the time, the luxury in a way, to think a little bit differently, to change tactic, to actually have a bigger perspective, to be a little bit more, I won't say philosophical, but instead of saying like, I'm gonna go after this opportunity because I know I can make the most money, it could be, I'm gonna go for this because there's something in it for me as well, like at the human level. Or, hey, I'm seeing this opportunity and I feel comfortable now going after the opportunity where before I would have just kept working. So if you think about the Chinese millennials who are able to work and live at home, or like they've got a job, right? And they are, let's just say 24 to 32 years old. You know, if they weren't living with their parents, they would have to pay bills. There'd be that fire to save money, you know, like that tangible fear of not being able to pay bills that might keep them in a job and in a space where they don't speak up too loudly because they don't want to lose their job. They don't want to like have their boss lose face. But this is starting to change. Actually, if you can harness the fact that a lot of the Shanghai or the urban millennials live with their parents until they get married, and you can harness that confidence, because when they live at home and they don't have to pay those bills, they're far more confident in themselves. Because if they lose their job, there's not as much risk on the downside. And so what you're seeing is there's a lot more interest in being bold. You match that to the tangibility of ideas, and you match it to the fact that this generation is not just more curious, they're more connected than ever. So they're sharing ideas. And I think all of this is basically setting the foundation for out-of-the-box thinking to come up. For all, you know, it's economic development has reached a point where people are comfortable and confident. The millennials are far more likely, not just in China, but globally, to be entrepreneurial minded, to be a little bit selfish and see things differently. And they feel empowered enough through various mechanisms to speak their mind and act on that. And the last thing is, you know, the downside risk for failure and the upfront cost for trying are so low. Like starting a new business, failing like it's not 5 years of family savings going into a company anymore. It's starting a Tmall shop. It's getting on LinkedIn. It's a lot of social. And so, you know, for them, that's almost in a way it's very native. They just have to, like, I've got 3,000 friends on WeChat anyway. I'm gonna see which 30 want to buy my X. And that just gives them, I think, more power. Do you have a second question for us? Because this might be the last time we see you for a while.
Okay, so it seems like you've shown me what China has done culturally, but have transnational corporations done anything to promote, the development of senior living?
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think that, this goes back to some of the earliest interactions that we had with brands like, say, GE, UPS, Unilever, the large brands and the frameworks that they bring from a human resource development standpoint are just second to none, or have been second to none. And that's also changing. There's some Chinese firms that we've seen lately that are doing really interesting stuff, integrating WeChat into their executive or into their general training platforms where they do a little bit more micro content. But yeah, I mean, it used to be really interesting. And this goes also back to like my teaching at Siebes, where I could basically put into a hierarchy from top to bottom, just coming in, not raw talent, not intellectual, but the capacity to execute on their natural talents, right? The top students would be those who either lived abroad or worked abroad. The second level would be those who studied in China, totally Chinese, but then they go work for like a GE or UPS or a Bosch or Google or who, like they would go work for a foreign company who would bring in these experiences. They would teach them how to fail. They would empower them at a much higher level than the third level, which would be a Chinese student who graduated locally Chinese and then worked for, say, a Chinese enterprise or a Chinese state-owned enterprise or a Chinese entrepreneur, one of the two. And the difference was huge. Because what I found was, and actually I work with organizations like GE where I would also know their Chinese equivalents, or people who worked at the Chinese equivalent like a Huawei. You'd put these two next to each other and you would see how they would talk about the company, about how the Chinese company would basically like hit this target, get this done, get this done, get this done. And the GE group would be a little bit more like learn, fail, experiment, learn, fail, experiment, learn. But there was always the goal. Like, don't get me wrong, there was always KPIs in front of them. But it was almost like the leadership of the foreign company at the time understood that through this process, they'll get to that goal. But don't hammer them on the goal. Hammer them on the process of getting to that goal. Where the Chinese companies would hammer them on the process, and oftentimes the goal would be kind of secondary in a way. Like they would feel it was primary, but because they were micromanaging them through it, the employees never had confidence, they never felt empowered, and therefore they never truly became innovators. Like they always held themselves back. The other thing I think is for many years, Chinese firms did hold themselves back in the public space. That could be if you're a technology firm, you'd have to abide by censorship rules or the technology constraints, things like that. And I think when you go through that process, when your culture is to hold yourself back, even though you're talking about going forward, but when you look at the actual operations, like to never go too far because you might lose your client, to never go too far because you might lose access to an international market, but to just like do enough to win the business, but not do enough to like take over. That I think really affects your employees, because it basically says like just hit a base hit, go for the double, put the bunt down. And actually I was looking at this the other day, like the highest home run hitters often tend to be at the highest strikeouts, right? Like they're swinging for the fences every time. And I think that culturally for years and organizationally for years, the Chinese firms just didn't do that as well, where the international firms did that better. But that's certainly changed. That's another thing that's definitely changed is the Chinese firms have certainly learned a lot, in part because they're poaching people from these Western firms who understand those modules. I mean, you make $150,000 a year as an HR person or $250,000 a year as an HR person at a foreign company. But that same person may make $500,000 to $1 million a year in a Chinese firm. They're trying to bring in the best talent because they're no longer trying to copy. It's no longer copy to China or copy for China. It's like innovate, make in China for the Chinese, and think differently.